And the next topic that was covered was the caliber of the firearm that was used, and it looks like a 9mm was the caliber of choice for 5 of those.
Yes, that's been the way it's that way for a number of years.
Is that 9mm more easily accessible?
I think at the time, back in the early 80s, the 9mm really hit the market, and a large number of them were bought by private owners, and those have now circulated out.
Okay, sounds good. Now, relationship between the victim and suspect, I do want to touch on this because it looks like about 21 of the 24, the victim knew the assailant.
Yeah, 21 of the 23, they knew him.
Right.
These are not strangers that are killing each other.
And do we see that as a trend as well as we look back?
It's always been, I think, the trend. The vast majority of murders in Danville are committed by people that know each other.
Okay, sounds good. Now, the circumstances of incident, I like the way we broke this down, and you can go over each of these. It looks like we had 7 drug-related, 4 gang-related, and 4 domestic, 3 arguments, and then a couple of singular ones there. But as we look at these, how do you all determine what the circumstance was for each of these guys?
Well, Mark, this is one of the hardest things to do, and I'll give you an example. Let's say that somebody who is a drug user, who belongs to a gang, is buying drugs from somebody, and they get into an argument that has nothing to do with gangs or nothing to do with drugs, but they get in an argument about an acquaintance of theirs. And somebody pulls out a weapon and shoots and kills somebody. So is that an argument-related death? Is that a gang-related death? Or is that a drug-related death? And we sort through all of the information that we know about the incident and then try to make the best judgment decision as to how to classify it.
Right. Now, as I see, we had 7 drug-related and 4 gang-related, and I know as a department, we are focused hard on those 2 areas with drugs and gang. I know we have a gang task force, and I know a lot of undercover operations when it comes to drugs as well.
That's correct.
And when it comes to gangs, how many officers do we have within the department that are looking into gang activity within the city?
We have 2 officers who are full-time gang investigators.
Okay.
We had some part-time for a while, but it came to the point where we decided we would have to put resources full-time on that task.
Okay, sounds good. Now, as we go ahead, we look at the victims, and it looks like a majority of these victims were males.
Yes.
18 and 5 females.
Yes.
And that looks like the norm, I guess, as you look across the United States, 78% male, 22 female, and in Danville we were right.
We were right on line. We were right in line with the national average.
And then we look at victims by race, 19 black and 4 white.
Yes.
I see that as well. Okay. Now, as we look by victims by age, large majority of these individuals were between the ages of 21 and 30, and what do we attribute that to when we look at that age group?
Well, I think the other slides will show why that was so important. A lot of these are young males who are unemployed and don't own vehicles and are in some circumstances that are not healthy on a Friday and Saturday night.
Right, okay, sounds good. Now, as we look at cause of death, and as we go back to that previous slide when we're talking about the firearms that were used, 18 of these murders occurred through gunshot.
Yes, and 1 was motor vehicle and 4 were a result of a cutting instrument.
Okay. Now, with the motor vehicle, without getting into too much detail about the case, how does that fall? Is that a vehicular homicide?
It's considered a manslaughter. And
okay.
the murder and manslaughters are all lumped together as far as homicides go. Okay. So that's why that was included.
And then, of course, the next one was cause of death. You looked at firearms and knives, and it looks like we're about 8% higher in the use of firearms with the cause of death.
And we are. Those figures are a little higher, but one of the reasons why is that when you take the entire United States, there are a lot of other causes of death burning, poisoning, pushing somebody off of a cliff, drowning, and when you factor those in, that's why the numbers of deaths related to firearms or knives is a little bit lower for the United States than it is for Danville.
Because we're basically dealing with 3 different causes, whereas numerous in the United States. And then the next slide, I know, was something that really caught the eye of a lot of individuals that were compiling these numbers and members of the coalition, and that is the high school education of the victim. And it looks like 13 of the victims either graduated from high school or went back and got their GED.
Yes. We had 2 in school. 4 we were not able to determine their educational status. Only 4 of the 23 victims clearly did not graduate that we could verify, and 3 obtained their GED while in jail, and 10 graduated from high school.
And so that kind of makes you sit back and wonder, because I guess perception is that these kids aren't in school, they're out on the streets getting into doing bad things, but numbers show, at least when it comes to the victims.
At least when it comes to the victims. Now, we're working on the suspects, and we'll look at them. But for the victims, majority of them had a high school education.
And higher education of graduates, that was something you all delved even further into. 5 had no college, but 3 did have some college, and 1 actually had a 2-year degree, and then 1 was unknown there.
That's correct. And that's of the 10 people that graduated from high school. That was their higher education status.
And then we look at family structure, and I know this really plays a major part in what these children are getting into at a young age. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, you really have to start with these individuals at a young age, no matter who they are, to put them on the positive track. And I think, as it shows here, 14 of the victims were in a single-parent home, 2 unknown, and 7 had 2-parent homes. So
what we did not do, Mark, was try to determine in the single-parent homes how involved the father was. And so there could have been a single-parent home, but both parents were heavily involved. We didn't find that out.
Okay, sounds good. Now, marital status of the victims, you had 21 were unmarried and 2 were married.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And employment status at the time of death, 12 were unemployed, but 10 were employed. So
yes, but the interesting thing about the 10 that were employed, when you look at the next slide, was that of that 10 who were employed, 5 of those were the women victims.
Right. All the women were employed.
All the women were employed.
And the men, you had 12 that were unemployed and 5 were employed. 1 was retired. Okay. And this was another statistic you all gathered, and that was the driver's license at the status at the time of death. As you see there, 10 were suspended and 5 had no license. So that does play maybe a factor in
I think it clearly does, because the normal progression for a lot of people is to graduate from high school and then have a license and get a job and acquire a vehicle so that you can be mobile. And this speaks to that not having a license and being suspended were the majority of the victims.
Right. And then we look at the ownership of the vehicle, saying that they didn't have a license suspended, and 15 of them did not own a vehicle. 8 did own a vehicle.
That's correct.
Now we look at the victim's criminal history status. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit there. And as we'll see here, most of these victims had a criminal record.
That's correct. 20 of the 23 victims did have a criminal record, and the 3 that did not, 2 were very young males who were 13, 14 range, and they were still in school.
And they had a criminal record, and it was a pretty extensive record for most of these.
For all the others. Yeah. So if you really exclude the 2 juveniles who were victims, there was 1 adult who did not have a criminal record, but 20 of the other adult victims did.
So it's kind of a vicious cycle they get into there.
Yes, and when you look at the next slide, when you're looking at severity of crimes, half of them had misdemeanor convictions, and half of them, 10 of them, had felony convictions.
And now I want to skip ahead to the case status, because this is one of the positives that can come out of all of these numbers, and that is 18 of these murders or manslaughters have been cleared by arrest.
That's correct. That's a significant number out of 23 deaths, 18 have been cleared by arrest, and we have charges pending in 3, and 2 are still active.
And that's hats off to the Danville Police Department for all the work that they've done on these cases to close these cases out. And as we look at the next slide, and you did like a generalized statement of a victim description here in the city of Danville. Can you explain that just a little bit about?
What we did, we just took the majority from each one of those slides and made a generalized victim description, and that's what it shows on the slide. It's an unmarried black male in his 20s from a single-parent home. He has a high school education but is unemployed with no car and no license. He would have a criminal record, would know his assailant, and would die from a 9mm handgun as a result of his willing involvement in an argument, good drug, or gang-related incident during the evening hours of a Friday or Saturday night in a residential area in the central section of Danville. So that kind of captures all of those slides and all of those statistics on the victim and puts it into this one statement.
Very good. Now we look at the challenge here, as you mentioned. You got 3 bullet points here. What was the consensus from the coalition members when we talked about the challenge that we face here in the city of Danville? Anything stick out in your mind between the dialogue of the individuals that were present at the meeting that day?
Well, I think the thing that really shocked a lot of people was the educational level. I mean, the assumption was that the victims had not received a high school education, and the majority of them had. And then I think the second thing that was revealing was the criminal record of the victims. So it was an eye-opener that we're doing some of the right things in working to get people educated and to get them jobs, but we've got a little bit more tweaking to do.
Sounds good. Well, Chief, I appreciate you so much coming on today and giving us some insight into these numbers that you presented to the coalition, and we look forward to working with you in the future, because I know you've got some other statistics you're going to be presenting at a future coalition meeting, as well as we look at the suspects in these murders and manslaughters. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And thank you at home for watching. We appreciate you joining us today. If you would like more information on the Safe Danville Coalition, please call the City Manager's office at 799-5100, and they will be happy to provide you with all the information you need to become a member. So until next week, have a great day.
You're watching City TV 20, the City of Danville's government access channel.